on the streets of New Orleans and then black out again and then come back to it. And we'd be making out on a couch somewhere in some hotel lobby and then black out again. And who knows?
Welcome to Self-Made and Sober. I'm your host, Andrew Lassis with selfmade-coaching.com. And in this podcast, it's my job to interview people who are not only crushing it in business, but have also struggled with addiction in the past and are in long-term recovery. Be sure to join our Facebook group where we help entrepreneurs grow and scale their business at facebook.com/groups/SMC Mastermind, like Self-Made Coaching Mastermind. I hope you enjoy the show, and be sure to subscribe and rate the show afterwards so you can get notified each Friday when we put out a new episode. Welcome to the Self-Made and Sober podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lassis, and with me today is stand-up comedian and TV writer Jay Light. He's best known for being involved in the roast battle on Comedy Central, and he's also a host of a podcast called Blockbusting with Jay Light, where Jay and his guests talk smack about a movie they wish they hadn't seen. And Jay's also a person in long-term recovery, and he's been sober since September 10th, 2015. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be on.
It's crazy, you know, like our background of, I mean, we used to play Call of Duty together like 10 years ago, hadn't stayed in touch, and my sister was visiting, and she was like, "Oh yeah, for your podcast, you know Jay Light? He's actually in sobriety, and he's actually like doing big things. Like you should probably reach out to him." And it's like, okay.
That's crazy, man. I remember. I don't remember a whole lot about back in those days. That was like when I was in the thick of it. But I remember those. There were some times, and I'm glad that I'm glad that all three of us have found some solace and some recovery.
Yeah, looking back on the journey of where it was and what it led to and stuff. Why don't you give everybody a little background on what it was like growing up, what happened, and what it's like now?
Totally. So I'm from Texas originally. I basically spent my whole life there, and I grew up in a very religious household. I was going to church a lot. I had sort of this, what felt like I was sort of on like a moral high ground. And I had a lot of my life where I was not exactly sure how to treat that. I had a hard time finding friends. Because part of the way, and this is something that I learned over the course of doing step work and going through recovery, is part of the way that my alcoholism manifesting before I started drinking, which is in me allowing myself to be treated in a certain way by other people and believing that that is the only way to get friends or get people to like me. And what that was primarily was me being a doormat and being sort of a punching bag of a group of people. So, you know, I spent a lot of my time either getting bullied by people who I thought were cool and who I wanted to hang out with, or as I sort of grew out of that, by the time I got to high school, it still came up with me keeping my feelings tamped down or not talking about things that were actually bothering me. I had weird stuff going on with religion around the high school time. When I was in middle school, I had it's hard to call it an attempt, but I had a suicide attempt because it kind of stopped real quick. Yeah, I had a belt around my neck. I was looking for a place to hang myself from, and then I heard what I attribute at the time to the voice of God saying, "Don't do it," and so I didn't. But I remember sharing that when I was at church at my it was a confirmation, and you had to share a story of your faith, and I told that story, and then there was like no reaction or response. And it felt weird for a group of people who were ostensibly like, "Oh, this is, you know, God is love and blah, blah, blah," and all that stuff, to have that little of a reaction or really any kind of aftercare, aftermath where people were trying to help me out. And so I took a lot of that stuff that had kind of been stewing around in me since that incident, and then since me not knowing my self-worth, feeling like the world owed me everything, but also like I didn't deserve anything. Like basically just like a high status doormat is how I led my life for a long time. And then I started drinking in college. So turned 18, went to school, was out of state, was in a place where I didn't know anybody. I was like, all right, cool, classic, time to reinvent myself. I'm going to make this happen. It's going to be great. Started drinking immediately, like compromising myself by starting to drink right from the jump, because I was telling people, instead of telling people I didn't drink, I said, I'm not a big drinker. And so the first time I ever drank, I shotgunned a beer at a frat party, and everything was just beautiful after that. Like that first night, I was like, it was what I was missing the whole time. It was the missing piece to the puzzle. So that set off a series of a lot of binge drinking, a lot of blacking out. I started my sophomore year. The first, freshman year was basically like, oh, I can drink with impunity, and all these guys who I want to be my friends are going to think I'm super badass for being able to shoot Evan Williams without any kind of chaser or anything like that. This is great. This is sweet. And I started going, I joined a fraternity, and I started blacking out all the time. And the things that I was doing at the time, once I started drinking, it really highlighted other defects in my personality, which is that I can act selfishly, and I can act in ways that put other people in harm's way, put other people in danger. Like when I was drinking, for the most part, I was a pretty happy and fun-loving drunk. But then there were times when a switch could flip, and I generally was not conscious where these switches were flipping, but I would still do things where I would yell at people, or I would be callous to people. It manifests in stuff. I remember being told this after the fact one time, but I was dating a girl, and I was supposed to go out of town, and she drove me to the airport, and she really liked me, and I liked her, but I didn't want to date her. And we'd been sort of doing this like on and off thing for an entire semester. And I basically was just like spending this whole night where she was supposed to take me to the airport, just making fun of her for wanting to date me. And I don't remember any of it. And she told me about it all secondhand, and I was mortified, but I did not think at the time, okay, what do I do to change that behavior? Because I was like, well, it is what it is, right? I guess we're not supposed to date. She's really cool and nice, but I felt remorse, but I didn't feel enough to actually make a change. And that was the kind of stuff that I did times and times again. I would do stuff that would put people in harm's way and then feel bad, which didn't change anything. I used to be a camp counselor, and I would drink out on the job, and you're watching other people's kids, but I'm drunk or high. I'd smoke weed while I was doing that, and that that's not a great way to to lead your life and to be around being put in charge of other people's kids. Because I also look a certain way. There's a joke that I used to open my act pretty much all the time where I say I suffer from camp counselor face, and I've always looked super innocent and unassuming, and that plays to my advantage whenever I was really actively in my alcoholism and actively drinking and using, because that way people don't believe that the things that I'm doing are coming from me. Like I remember there's a time when I made a bucket at a party using Robitussin and vodka. And at our fraternity's chapter meeting, the president of our fraternity was like, hey, we heard there was a Robitussin bucket going around at a party. Whoever made that, come forward, or we're going to shut the entire chapter down and figure out who did it and kick them out. And so I was like, all right, well, I got to come forward then. And I went and talked to him, and I basically got a slap on the wrist. He was like, Jay, you really? all right. And nothing bad happened after that. I didn't even have to go to standards. I didn't get any kind of discipline. They're just like, don't do that. And I was like, yep, okay, totally. But that's the thing. Like I was I think that probably also played into why I drank the way I did. It's because it's the novelty of it, right? It's the dichotomy of me looking a certain way and then acting as a different way and being a different person. I liked the idea of being a different person than I was. I spent so much of my life not knowing who I really was and sort of trying to shift around between different groups and not be the person who I always thought I might be. And I never really leaned into that until I got into recovery. So fast forward a little bit. I'm in Los Angeles. I've been in LA almost 7 years at this point. And I got sober in 2015. I'd been in LA I just hit 3 years in LA. I moved here right after I graduated college, pretty much. And I was working in comedy clubs primarily. I came out here thinking I was going to be doing stand-up at night, because I'd already started doing stand-up when I was in college. And I figured, well, I'll work like production jobs because I have a film degree. So I figure I'll work production jobs during the day, and then I'll at night go do open mics. And then I wound up with a job at a comedy club about a month after I moved to LA. And I worked at that club for about a year and a half. And then after that, I got a job working at my dream job, which was the Comedy Store. Comedy Store is an amazing comedy club. It's this place where they have a long history of the guys who work the door there being comics and coming up as in their craft because of working at the Comedy Store. So you got guys, classic Jay Leno, David Letterman, all the way up to people like, modern day great guys like Bobby Lee and Ari Shaffir. And I got a job there and my life changed. And it was also, I'm coming from another club where I was still drinking a lot and doing things like taking a bus to work and not driving and drinking on the bus and taking drinks off of people's tables because I knew that I could because I didn't have to drive home. Or even sometimes when I did have to drive home, there are times when I would get drunk and I remember I should have gotten a DUI at one point. There was one time I was coming home. They had a sister club and I was coming home from there and I got pulled over and I'd been drinking and I'd smoked and the cop didn't even, I was driving like 30 miles over the speed limit on highway and didn't even get a reckless ticket. I just got a speeding ticket and I was amazed. And I attribute that to one of those things like higher power looking down and being like, hey, this is one of your last chances. Now I think about it that way. But at the time I was just like, laughing it off.
Or it was camp counselor face helping it play off again.
Right, exactly. Who knows? When I look like this, I can get away with things. It's a dangerous face to have.
It's like I wanna arrest you, but just how can I arrest you? Look at you.
You can't do anything wrong. Why would you put me in this position?
Oh, shucks.
Oh, golly. I feel like, anytime a cop arrests me, they put me into Andy Griffith.
So you avoided DUI thanks to something bigger than you, because under no circumstances should you have not gotten a DUI. I can tell you from personal experience, they're not fun to deal with. So after that happened, was that sort of where you decided you need to change? Or what was sort of the catalyst that you were just like, this is it?
Oh, man. I mean, I was working at the Comedy Store at this point, and that wasn't the change. The change didn't even come until probably about a year after the potential DUI. I was going through, I'd gone through a breakup, and I was drinking a lot in the aftermath of that. And working at the Comedy Store, you could drink all the time with impunity because the bartenders are super cool and they hook you up. And it was starting to get worse. Like I was feeling myself bottom out, and it felt bad for the first time. Like I had gone to a wedding, and we'd gotten drunk. We'd all gone out the night before, and I had the shakes the next day, and I never had that before. Even my friends, it was like frat friends, and they were like, "Oh God," and I was like, "You guys, what happened?" And then I went to another wedding, and it was in New Orleans, so I was getting even crazier. And I remember like I blacked in and out a lot that night. My ex was at the wedding, and we were fighting, and like I would black out and we were fighting, and then on the streets of New Orleans, and then black out again, and then come back to it, and we'd be making out on a couch somewhere in some hotel lobby, and then black out again, and who knows. And then after that, I was like, well, maybe I should slow down a little bit. And I remember it was Labor Day. Labor Day was the last day I got drunk of 2015, and I got to I had to work that day. It was a Monday, and I was like, all right, well, I got to work, but I'm going to go to this Labor Day barbecue, and I'm not going to drink today. Not going to drink. And I get there like 10, 11, sometime early in the morning, and as soon as a beer was offered to me, I drank it immediately, and I drank a handful more of those. By the time I got to work, I was pretty good and drunk, and I had a shot at work once I got there, and then I clocked in, and then I started feeling sick, and I got one of the new guys to cover the rest of my shift, and then I went and had another drink, and then I went and did my spot, because on Mondays that's when employees get to go up and do a guaranteed spot. So I did my employee spot, and then I had another drink and clocked out. And then I went home, and I had a tall boy PBR in my fridge, and I got home and I popped it open, and that was like the shot through my head, where I was like, oh, I shouldn't drink this. And then I called one of my good friends, and she was like, what's up? And I was like, hey, I think I need to quit drinking, and can you come pick me up, and can we talk about this? And she did, and we drove around. We talked for a long time, and we drove around Mulholland, and then I had a couple days later, I had a show at the store, and one of the bartenders there basically, like, I took a shot because I felt like I couldn't not take a shot, and I took it, and I was like, nah, I can't drink anymore. If I stay here, it's all gonna go to hell again. And so I left, and then that was the last drink I ever had.
When you took that, I mean, so many people struggle with I'm going to get sober, and then things get better, and they fall back in. What do you attribute to? I mean, that was like your I'm done, and then you've just stayed sober magically since then. That's not most people's experience. What do you think attributes to that?
I find myself, I find myself in this scene in Los Angeles where the industry sort of has a lot of famous drunks and addicts and alcoholics and people who suffer from all sorts of mental illness. And for just as much as that is a true aspect of working in entertainment in general and comedy specifically, there's also a lot of people who are sober. And when I started talking about wanting to get sober, and there were people who I knew were sober, so I talked to them. And I didn't go to any meetings at all for the first 3 months after I'd quit drinking. And there were people who I was talking to a lot, and I'd make phone calls and I'd text and I would talk to these guys in person, and they would all encourage me to go to meetings and do the things to actually promote recovery instead of me just white knuckling it. But it just I knew that the going back and relapsing, and that's the thing that I think about now, and the thing that keeps me from going back out there, is that I know what lies on the other side, and I don't want to go back to that. And even at the time, I had the they call it, it's the gift of desperation, as I've heard people say it. And I hadn't had that the entire time I'd been drinking, and I had it. I finally had it, and I didn't want to squander that. It felt like I was really being given a chance by the universe. So I stuck to it, and I started going to meetings. A few months after, it was my first meetings were like December of that year. I pretty quickly found a sponsor right around start of the new year. Started working with him, and it's been the way it's been ever since. You know, I have him still. I work with him. I still do my 12-step work. It's not the most perfect program, but I keep up with it, and I've stayed sober since then.
When you got sober, you had already been in the comedy scene. Did you have to rewire how your acts went, or was it just sort of, I just keep doing the same thing without the influence of alcohol or anything else?
Oh, absolutely I did. I had such a hard time at first because when I started going on stage after I'd quit drinking, I had no idea that I had been using alcohol so much as a crutch. I had no idea. And I got on stage for the first time, and I remember feeling afraid again and anxious again. And I hadn't dealt with those feelings in years, you know, because I've been doing, I mean, at this point in my life, I've been doing stand-up almost 9 years. And so when I got sober, it had been about 5. And I was just blown away by how it just felt so different. And what it really is that there's no, when I was drunk or high or whatever, and I was performing, there was a wall up between me and the audience, because alcohol put up a wall between me and the world, and I can exist in this safe cocoon that I've built for myself in this echo chamber. And when that's not there, there's nothing blocking me from the world. And on stage is the same way. There's nothing that's blocking me from being there, present in the room on stage. And so I had to adjust to that. I had to really figure out how to connect to people and connect to crowds. But also it was kind of a beautiful thing, because I was doing shows at the time where you're kind of a raw nerve on stage. This is right, you know, I was getting really heavily involved in roast battle right around this time. Like, I'd had some of my finest battle moments were right around when I got sober, you know, because I had gone from doing the show in the belly room at the Comedy Store to doing it on TV. And the confidence that I had been forced to build up in the wake of not drinking anymore and sobering up and dealing with this newfound rawness and having to really feel being on stage and be present in that moment, that affected the way that I performed in the best way, because now I'm writing jokes that I feel good about telling, and it doesn't feel like I'm doing things to pander to people. And certainly the lows are lower, I would say. You know, I certainly had my fair share of lows while I was on stage when I was drinking still, but I wasn't really processing them the way I do now. It feels like I'm able to learn better as a comedian having sobered up than I was when I was still drinking, because I actually feel the stakes a little bit more, if that makes sense. You know, it's like I can be affected and allow myself to be affected instead of just something happening to me on stage, a joke going well or a joke going poorly, a show going well, a show not being quite up to snuff. And I can accept it for what it is now in a way that I couldn't before. I would do shows sometimes and I would bomb. I remember one of the shows that I bombed at the hardest when I was still drinking. I was doing a show in it was like a steakhouse in the middle of the desert and outside of LA. And I did this show and I was supposed to do 30 minutes and I was bombing, and the guy who ran the show lit me early and made me get off stage early. I got off stage. I'd done maybe 18 or 20 minutes. And I was so mad. And I went to the bar and I was drinking more, and the bartender was like being super sweet to me. And I was like, oh, she's cute. And I started hitting on her. And then she was like, dropped the boyfriend thing real quick that she had one. And I was like, oh, well, great. So then I just started drinking more. And it was just like this whole, at that point, the show became the least of my worries. When like something like that happened to me now, I am probably going to do something at some point during the show that will help me fill out those 30 minutes. Instead of doing whatever I did at the time, which was stop caring and retreat into myself. And then after the fact, not actually look at it as a chance for growth. And now I have a means of looking at my behavior and being like, all right, how can I grow from this? How can I change from this? I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you learn in 12-step programs. Anyway, that's the kind of thing that I learned once I have a roadmap of like, all right, these are the ways in which I behave that are not the way to help me be the best, truest version of myself. And selfishness and being a doormat and acting in ways that are not going to help me either as a person or as a performer. And so I'm glad that I have the consciousness now to understand that.
And in the past, so I know for myself, feeling feelings was a very difficult thing, and it was easier just to not feel anything and just numb it out. And so it kind of sounds like what you're describing is that you bomb and then, well, you can just, numb it out and I don't care anymore. But now you take a more reflective look at your life where I acted this way, this is how this performance went. And then you look at yourself in the mirror and you can recognize, I should have done this differently. If I want to succeed, I should be, instead of going this route and then numbing it out and pretending like it didn't happen, you can make the U-turn. You have to recognize, though, that you're going in the wrong direction. And I run into that with a lot of my coaching clients. They'll be saying, I'm having issues with this with my employees. I tried this, I tried that, and I fired him, and then I got a new employee. And they keep doing the same thing. It's like that Einstein or whoever, the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over, expecting different results. So
right, yeah.
What are some of the strategies that you implement to look back at, say, a set that didn't go well?
Well, I do there's a lot of post-game analysis that happens. And that is frankly the scariest part of the whole process for me at this point. In addition to doing regular 12-step work, I also have gone through the Artist Way, which is a program specifically. It calls itself a program for creative recovery. It's very, very obviously heavily 12-step influence, and it references reading the AA Big Book and the Elon Big Book during the reading of the text. But there's a lot in there that talks about of just doing the work of being a creative person and how just doing the work is going to be fine and you will grow from that. And that's the kind of thing that I have to remind myself of constantly. Like I'll sit back and I'll listen to old sets because I record every set I go and do every time I'm on stage, and I record them. And in an ideal world, I listen to them every day and I am taking notes and I'm doing stuff right after it happens. But I don't live in an ideal world, and I am not still an ideal version of myself, even though I strive to be. And as a result of that, I have a backlog of sets that have built up over the course of several months. So right now I'm still going back through stuff from April, but I know that if I don't sit down and do that work and listen to myself and listen to how I sound and the jokes that I'm telling and how people react to them, and if there's anything new that I'm doing that is working or things that I'm doing that are old that aren't working, if I'm not paying attention to that, then I'm doing not only myself a disservice, but I'm doing the audience a disservice. You know, one of my favorite things that someone told me, a fellow sober comedian, he looks at doing comedy as an act of service. Because at the end of the day, it is. You know, you're there. No comedy audience is there trying to not enjoy themselves. And if I'm up there performing and I am not coming from a place of trying to bring joy to the audience, then I'm not really doing my job. So anything that I do that keeps me from being effectively able to do that, which comes out in things like doing jokes that don't work over and over again, not being willing to change, adding things that work, or taking out things that don't work, or performing in a certain way where it doesn't look like I'm enjoying myself, and anything in that realm. If I'm doing that, then I'm not being of service to the crowd. And I do a lot of shows that are at rehabs and recovery, treatment centers and sober livings and a lot of recovery-based performing. And those are the kinds of places, those are the kinds of rooms where I go on stage where you really feel that. And so I need to do the work that is the busy work of listening to the sets and writing jokes and editing myself. Because if I'm not doing that, then it's a detriment to not only me, but to the people who I'm trying to serve. You know, I still want to be the best version of myself. And that means not thinking about myself all the time. You know, there's a lot of stuff that has to come into play in the act to make sure that it is the best version of the act. But the best version of the act is, at the end of the day, it's not just for me. It's for the people I perform for. And my job is to be of service to those people. So if I'm being selfish, then I'm not being of service and making those people enjoy themselves and have that separate moment. And that's, I think, comedy at its best.
And I think that a lot of people, and this doesn't just apply to comedy, but I think a lot of people just doing that introspective work and kind of looking at, is what I'm doing actually working, or am I just kind of telling myself that this is as good as it gets and just kind of coasting? And I've seen that in my own recovery, even, where put together a couple years and it's no longer that desperation of, I need to get sober because my life is so crazy, or I have to run every single decision of my entire life by a team of sober support because I can't make decisions for myself. Like, I've gotten past the point where every single thing that I do has to get run through a filter because my life has returned to a state where it's not terrible. And I know for myself, I can coast on that. And I just got off the phone with one of my mentors, and he was basically just dropping knowledge on knowledge on knowledge. And basically, like, if you want to feel the way that you felt, you need to be doing the things that you were doing. And so even where you're at now, multiple years into it, you're still perfecting the act. And you've recognized that if you're going to succeed in this, you need to be reviewing the tape. You need to be taking notes. You need to be constantly trying to improve yourself, because if you just stay where you're at, nothing changes when nothing changes. And I'm curious with your podcast, Blockbusting, you want to give us a little background on how that idea came up and what you've done and accomplished with it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, so I came up. I feel like at this point it's a good idea for any comedian to think about the ways that they can put their ideas out there as much as possible and as digestible way as possible. And for a lot of comics, podcasts, it's very easy to make. Everybody's doing them. They're fun. And I tried a handful beforehand. Those ideas all got aborted over the course of a handful of episodes. And I'd been thinking about doing another one. And I was just talking to my buddy, Frank Castillo, who's a great comedian. He and I did the roast battle together, got hired at the store together, all that good stuff. And I was just talking about wanting to do a podcast about something that I enjoy. And so I wanted to combine something that I like, which is movies, with another thing that I like, which is talking shit and having and being in that frame of mind comedically. And I thought, well, there's a lot of podcasts out there that are about bad movies and people taking a look at why a bad movie got made or making fun of a bad movie. And I think that there's an oversaturation of that. You know, there's plenty of those podcasts out there. There's plenty of those YouTube shows out there. What there isn't is people talking about why they don't like something in particular, because opinions are subjective. You'll defend your opinions to the death, and your opinion can also be totally insane. And that's where Blockbusting really, I think, that's where I think it gets to exhibit a lot of the beauty of the show. There's tons of movies out there, and there's tons of opinions out there, and people pick movies that I question at times, but they always stick to their opinion, and you get to hear the crazy, insane reasons why people don't like something. And sometimes it's a movie that me and the guest both don't like. Sometimes it's a movie that I love and the guest hates. Occasionally we'll do a flip where the guest will defend a movie that is a bad movie, and I'll be spending the whole time, instead of trying to attack their bad opinion, attack their positive opinion. And it's weird and it's fun. And, you know, it's one of those other things where, like, over the course of doing that, I also had to have a shift in making the show. It started out as one thing where I would do like an hour-long show, and I would spend the first half talking about box office results and movie news and that kind of stuff. And then the other half of the show would be talking about the movie that my guest had picked for that week. And I got about 40 episodes in, and this is at the time when I was doing one episode a week. And it just felt kind of weird. It didn't feel quite like the show that I was hoping it would be. It felt like it was dragging a little bit, and the pacing was kind of off. And this was not something that just me was noticing. Other people were noticing it and talking to me about it too. And I thought, all right, well, let me change something up. And so 40 episodes in, almost a year into doing the show, I decided to chop the episode time in half, get rid of all the extraneous stuff, just talk about the movie, and go to 2 episodes a week. And I think the show has really livened up a lot since then. And it's not like I didn't enjoy doing it before, but even now, after just doing that simple change, the show feels so much better. And it feels like the kind of thing that I get so much joy out of doing the show. It's so much fun because I don't have to deal with all the extra nonsense anymore. I can just focus on what the show is really supposed to be about all along. I can cut through all the chaff and get to the wheat. And again, that's the kind of thing that I could only really be conscious of because I'm willing to be wrong, and I'm willing to take the second chance of, like, all right, well, let me look at this again. Let me see what's working about this and get rid of all the stuff that's not working and that feels like it's not doing the best service to the show and to what the show's potential could be. And so at this point, you know, I've done 130 some odd episodes of the show, and it's something that I don't see any signs of it slowing down or stopping. I feel like it's going to keep going until I don't want it to go anymore. But I really enjoy doing it. It's the first time that I've done a project like this that I like and that I can see continuing. It doesn't feel as run of the mill or something that I'm doing just because the way that I had done with other podcasts or projects like this that I'd done, which is really nice.
Yeah, and you come back around to that introspective work of, I've been doing it this way, and, you know, putting in a year of time and doing anything, you know, there's something to be said for even getting to that point. But you were taking the advice, you were looking at it, and you decided, I'm going to make this shift because it's the right thing to do, not necessarily the easier thing to do, because the easier thing to do is keep doing what you're doing. The harder thing to do is to make the next right move, which for you was cutting it down and getting rid of the introduction part where you talk about what had happened and then getting into with the guests. So I'm curious, what is one of the episodes that stands out the most? Who had just a completely wrong idea at what was good and or bad?
Oh man, I always think about this one. My friend Nicole Buchanan, who's a great writer and a great comedian. She was on Roast Battle season 3 on Comedy Central. She was writing on historical roasts on Netflix, which I was in the room for, and she came on to talk about E.T. And her whole reason for not liking E.T. is that the alien creeped her out. The alien being creepy looking ruined the entire movie for her. E.T. is a beautiful 5-star movie. E.T. is emotional, and it's a movie that transcends just being a kid's movie. And I remember rewatching it for that podcast, and I hadn't seen it in decades. And I was just blown away. I was like, how could anyone hate this movie? This movie's beautiful. I think I cried during watching this movie again. And I was just like, how? And so I talked to her on the show and her whole episode. And they're not necessarily trying to convince her that she's wrong, but just talk about like, well, how can you miss X and X and X? How can you miss like, the beauty of them melding and the running away and the alien and E.T. almost dying, coming back? And how can all of that stuff not affect you? And the alien being ugly ruined the movie for her. It's so silly to me to like not be able to look past that.
So what was her opinion on Mac and Me?
I don't think we even talked about Mac and Me then, but then we just did an episode where me and my buddy Carmen talked about Mac and Me, and Carmen loves Mac and Me, and I don't understand why. Mac and Me is hot garbage.
I've never seen the movie, but after listening to the episode, I was just like so excited. I hopped on Google. I'm like, what is this movie? It's blatant product placement of McDonald's in the form of an E.T. spinoff.
Dude, it's wild. That movie's totally insane. And everybody always talks about that wheelchair scene, but wheelchair falling off a cliff. Nobody ever talks about the wheelchair kid getting blown up outside of a mall. I don't get this movie. It's a movie that seems like it only could have been made in the 80s in the time of like extreme excess and nobody knowing like how to pull the brakes, how to pump the brakes on an idea. It's just like, all right, well, let's just go full bore. Let's get Coca-Cola and McDonald's and weird aliens and a kid in a wheelchair, and it's going to turn out to be something.
It was back before they were just like, hey, product placement works. Let's just push this up to a 10 and just see how blatantly obvious we can get away with it until people start catching on what's going on in this
exactly
in this exchange. So coming close to wrapping up, what advice do you have for someone who's trying to get sober or having trouble staying clean, what would you say is the next best move for them?
Well, the thing that worked for me and the next best move based on my own experience is to make sure that you're really putting in effort into doing the work of recovery. Any person who I sponsor or who I talk to about sobriety and trying to stay sober or get clean is you got to do the work. You know, the work is there for a reason. It's the thing that provides guidance and framework and gives you a roadmap for the stuff within you and the behaviors that you exhibit that help you figure out, all right, well, these are the things that I do. Here are some contrary behaviors and contrary actions to those things. And here's specific examples about how I use those behaviors to hurt others and hurt myself. And without that roadmap, without that outline and that foundation of framework that I have, because I did the step work, I would not be sober today. It's tough. It sucks sometimes. And despite that, it's so important to get that work done. It's homework. Homework sucks. Look, I'm not here to say that homework is a wonderful and beautiful thing and it's great, but the result's great. The result's beautiful. My life is completely different from where I could have imagined it being. And you know, the funny thing is that I probably, if even if I wasn't sober, there is a chance that I could be where I'm at, but I have no idea what those chances would be, or if I would be offered opportunities like what I've gotten over the course of the past couple of years and squandered them and thrown them away. But what I do know is because I am sober, because I've done the work and the reflection and continue to strive to do that work and that reflection and continue to do things like the 10th, 11th, and 12th step work and talk to people and make phone calls and do service work and all that kind of stuff, and not just think about me all the time, is that I get to live a life that I'd always wanted to live. And even if there's a chance that I could have had that previously, and if I could have had that with previous behavior, there's no guarantees. But I put myself in a place where, all right, well, I've guaranteed myself that I get to live this life now. And that might change. Something might shift. A job might elude me for a couple of months. I might not be able to get on stage as much as I want, but those things won't affect me the way that they would if I were still drinking. And I have that to look back on too. And that's really nice. So do the work. And the other thing, and this is something from a religious background, where one of the things that was hardest for me initially about joining a 12-step program at all is the God thing. And everybody's, it takes that differently. But the thing that I have allowed over the years, when I first started doing the step work, the thing that stuck out was a higher power of your own understanding and your own definition, and being able to define my version of a higher power as something different from what I had grown up with was amazing for me, because I had spent all this time thinking about God as an entity that I didn't want anything to do with. But it's a different God. It's a different higher power. I don't have to be so obtuse about it. I can just be like, all right, well, that was one way. That was one set of beliefs, and I'm going to allow myself to believe something different. I'm going to allow myself to shed those experiences that led me to have that bad outlook and try something new. And being able to take that chance and take that leap of faith has been, again, night and day. total shift in the way that I look at the world and the way that I look at my contribution to the world. And my concept of a higher power continues to evolve as I do, as I stack up more time and I continue to maintain sobriety and work program, and allowing myself to be open to that kind of change and to continually do the work that promotes that kind of change. That's the key for me. That's been the thing that's kept me sober.
Awesome. And do you feel that there's any carryover in your success in sobriety and the work that you do in that area of your life? Is there any carryover to how you have achieved the success that you've had in your career?
I think that there is. I think that I get to live the life that I live today because I did the work of getting sober and maintaining that sobriety. Like I said, I certainly could have stumbled into the things that I do now, which is things like performing all the time and working as a television writer and getting to be around a lot of really other great comedians and work with them and collaborate with them. I certainly could have stumbled into that if I was still drinking, but there's no guarantees. I mean, there's even no guarantees for where I'm at now, but I'm at least giving myself a better chance by maintaining sobriety and working at my sobriety and allowing that work and that attitude shift to affect other parts of my life. And if I didn't do that, then who knows? I was doing stuff previously to put myself and others in danger. I almost lost that job at the Comedy Store, and I certainly could have done probably similar things if I worked. One of my last jobs, I worked with a guy who was deep in the throes of some sort of addiction, and it affected everyone around him. It affected the entire show. And I think to myself often, I could be that guy. Years down the line, if I'm not doing the work and I wind up, it's like alternate reality me. Looking at this guy whose personal life is in shambles and who's not respected by the people who he works with, and he gets jobs because he's been around for a long time, but he keeps losing those opportunities because he acts in a certain way, and because he is behaving selfishly and is controlled by his addictions and by his behavior and that negative behavior. That could be me. That could totally be me. And that's the kind of thing that makes me think, yeah, I've made the right choice. I don't want to live that life.
Yeah, I don't know too many people that are on a good level of sobriety who are regretting that decision. I've seen people regret reverting back, and maybe it's just, the company that I keep, but that's been my experience for sure. So, Jay, in wrapping up, where can people find you and the podcast?
So you can find the podcast, Blockbusting. You can find that wherever you get podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, all that good stuff, and on YouTube. And then you can find me and my work. I'm on social media at DietJ. That's DietJay on Twitter and Instagram. And I have a website where you can see videos and show dates. That's jlightcomedy.com.
Awesome. Well, Jay, it was great having you on the show. It was great catching up, and have a great day, man.
Thanks, Andrew. Good talking. Thanks for having me on. Happy to spread the good word.
Thank you so much for listening to Self-Made and Sober. Be sure to join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/SMC Mastermind, like Self-Made Coaching Mastermind. I hope you enjoyed the show, and be sure to subscribe and rate the show so you can get notified each Friday when we put out a new episode.